For instance, the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund, created in 2000 by state legislature, issued more than $100 million in grants to businesses, including hospitals and plants, that install distributed generated technology on their sites. A study by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and the Clean Energy States Alliance estimated that a total of $3.5 billion will be invested by public benefit funds in clean energy businesses between 1998 and 2012. At least 15 U.S. states have public clean energy investment funds investing billions of dollars into early-stage companies and clean tech project finance. The Clean Energy Fund has been proposed by the Florida Renewable Energy Association. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding the use of clean, renewable energy technologies. The Florida Solar Energy Center is represented on its board of directors. Under the proposal, an assessment will be made on the electrical usage of each utility customer equal to about 60 cents a month for the average residential customer. This money will be dedicated to spur investment in renewable energy and clean tech. A department within the Florida Office of Energy and Climate Change would administer the fund. And based on Florida's 2006 total energy consumption, it is estimated that this fund will amount to about $114 million a year. Uses of the energy fund will range from educating Floridians on energy efficiency to providing financial incentive for solar manufacturing companies that establish factories in Florida. So what do you think of this idea? How important is it to establish a Florida Clean Energy Fund? Is this an achievable goal in the current economic environment?
Thank you. So again, if you would like to comment on this particular idea number 2, Clean Energy Fund, the question is, of course, what do you think? We are very interested in getting your comments. How important do you feel that it is to establish a Florida Clean Energy Fund? And do we think that it is actually achievable in this economic market? Any comments? Please step to the microphone.
Sorry, Kirsty Chadwick with the UCF Venture Lab. And as Carol Ann and I mentioned previously, my concern here is that $114 million when you're dealing with larger corporate incentives is actually not a large number, but it's a very large number if you're willing to dedicate a fair amount of that fund towards that innovation. And so to John's definition of clean tech, if you're talking about innovation, the innovation part of it, because we're so lacking in that gap funding in that early stage, part of the economic development. I think this is a good idea if you can better define what percentage of that would go to early stage versus manufacturing and some of the other things you brought up. So and I do think it's achievable based on taxes of energy bills and stuff like that, of which other states there's plenty of models out there to follow. So
thank you.
Dave Bruderly again. I will point out that the Gainesville City Commission basically voted to do this, in effect tax the utility customers a very small amount, about 1%, to pay for a very specific targeted program, which is putting solar panels on the rooftops in Gainesville, regional utility service territory. The idea of a statewide fund is long overdue. Many of us who have been active in this industry have had to go to California and other places seeking, or the federal government seeking funding just for research and development, let alone commercialization. There is effectively no money available for commercialization in the state of Florida. It's accessible to small businesses and entrepreneurs. A lot of the grant funding the state has put out has gone to big blue chip companies to support technologies which are worthy, but small businesses have a hard time competing for that. So I strongly support this initiative. The only addition I would make to it is that the award of the monies really needs to be tied to a performance criteria, something that is tangible, like with a goal towards zero carbon emissions. In other words, the technology should move towards a carbon footprint that is as low as it can possibly be taken under the technologies that are available. And that zero footprint is achievable.
Thank you.
Mark Tellem again, Florida Manufacturing Extension Partnership. The state already has a fund set up through the Sadowski Workforce Housing Act that impacts affordable housing. And if you were to look at life cycle cost analysis for materials that go into workforce housing or affordable housing, and if you were to look at the total cost of ownership of such housing, that could be a good start for developing some regulations at the state level and the local level. The local governments pull down those funds. For instance, the city of Orlando pulls down those funds for affordable housing stipends for citizens already. So I think that would be a good start, because that money would be available to all the businesses locally who are building homes, which are the single biggest source for energy consumption. Anyway.
Third idea. This idea comes from San Diego, creation of a Cleantech Challenge Grant Program. San Diego has already awarded 3 grants under this program. Its purpose will be to accelerate the commercialization of environmentally friendly technologies from academia to the private sector. It is a joint effort of the City of San Diego, the University of California, San Diego, and the San Diego EDC and other partners, such as Qualcomm. Under this program, there is a competition for seed grants of up to $50,000 for proof of concept and prototype construction. Winners also receive business mentoring services, similar to those we have here, available at the UCF Technology Incubator and Venture Lab. The first 3 grants were awarded last October. One, as an example, was to an engineering professor for a project to increase the efficiency of electricity generating PV panels by using quantum wells and waveguides to concentrate solar energy. For those of you who do not understand this, I am sure you will agree that at least it sounds very important. Our guest this morning, Mr. Shirazi, who represents the City of San Diego in this program, says this program is very important because angel and VC fund is not available at the early stage for startup companies. Here, we will need about from $150,000 to $500,000 a year to establish a Cleantech Challenge Grant Program, a modest amount of money compared with other ideas for promoting the growth of Cleantech in our community. So how important do you think this idea is to encouraging and growing Cleantech in Metro Orlando?
Now, I would definitely say we have some individuals who'd like to make comment on idea number 3. So how important is this idea to encourage and grow clean tech in Metro Orlando? If you would, please step over to the mic and let us hear your comments.
Just some quick thoughts on this. First of all, the Florida High Tech Corridor Council, which is USF, UCF, and UF, has an external matching grants program that's funded by the state. The funds are intended to be pulled by a business partnership where a business comes into the university and collaborates with the faculty and graduate student to get a project done. And in the weighing of those grants, when the committee reviews the proposals, they could skew that towards renewable energy just by incorporating a point system that takes that into account. The most important thing is that it's pulled by business rather than initiated by IP that's developed by faculty. If you look at the University of Florida, what they're doing is they're taking money from the Research Foundation there in Gainesville and building proof of concept devices related to IP, and then they're embedding the cost of those proof of concept devices into licensing arrangements where companies pick that up and then pay the foundation back those funds. So that would be something that's already in place that could be strengthened again to accelerate the process.
So because of that, Mark, would you rate that goal of a higher importance or a lower importance?
I didn't pick this up in my 2 choices du jour, but I think that grants are important. Actually, over at Moffitt, there was a guy, I think it was David Hale from San Diego, who was talking a little bit about the medical incubators out there having to do with scripts and things, and he identified grants. It wasn't in his PowerPoint presentation, but he identified grants as particularly important in these economic times, John, because the banks aren't loaning any money right now. We really need to look at grants, and I would advocate for existing grants because the state is also cutting back budgets right now. They just hit UCF very hard this week, I think, with a budget cut. But
so I think, John, I heard the answer to that was yes, right? Thank you. Please.
As always, of course, funding is good, especially for early stage. But in this particular case, I'm going to re-articulate the concerns I have on the dollar amounts we're talking about being so small. So if I had to choose, I would choose the previous one over this one because of the amount of funding that could go into the, these early stage projects. We have, to Mark's point, there's already a lot of programs going on in the state and the region. And again, many of them are at risk because of the budget cut. So with the caveat that, some of them may go away. And that's TBD based on some of the dynamics going on in the economy right now. But at least in the past, the state has done and the region has done a good job of providing incentives and programs at the level of what these are already. So I'd rather folks focus on what happens after they win that 55 to 100K kind of a grant, because there's also SBIR funding which comes from the federal government, but there's a lot of focus on that here in our region. As a source of funding for these early stage companies as well. So I am actually going to suggest we defer this and go for maybe a little bit bigger fund. Carolyn's nodding. That's good.
Sounds like a 4 to you?
3. I'm 3 because I have 5.
Dave Brutterly, one aspect on this that has troubled me is that there are a lot of opportunities out there for achieving green technology that are not proprietary. That there is no intellectual property. It's just practices that are readily available. I'll use the example of natural gas vehicles. Off-the-shelf technology, cheap, efficient, affordable, but not in common usage because there's no culture to support gaseous fuels in motor vehicles in the state of Florida. There's no driver from a clean air standpoint because our air is clean because all the pollution is blown out into the ocean every day, and unlike California, we don't have mountains to hold it in. So there are green opportunities like that that do not depend on breakthroughs in technology, and therefore it's very difficult to get proof of concept demonstration money in the environment that we have in the state today. So again, performance award of any funds needs to be tied to actually performance that achieves public policy goals. And we don't just want to socialize the risk just to privatize the profit. And that's part of the danger of what you're talking about here is that we are socializing the risk of making investments. And unless there's a clear public policy goal, you just don't want to go out and tie that to some intellectual property that somebody else can own and control and will make a whole lot of money with an upfront subsidy that doesn't have a clear public purpose. And also, you don't want to make sure that you don't overlook something that's low-hanging fruit that can be easily implemented. No property involved, no intellectual property involved, but still very high return on that investment from the public policy perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, we heard the comment being made about, where do we find that funding, that gap? And if anybody has any comment on that, we'd like for you to step over to the microphone as well. Where do we find some additional grants or any other ideas for funding? Which I think is one of the major questions, right?